During his speech at John Lewis's funeral, Bill Clinton brought up a civil rights leader and activist by the name of Stokely Carmichael. And before I get into any details about the critique or criticism that followed, I want you to take a quick look at what he had to say.
And I say there were 2 or 3 years there where the movement went a little bit too far towards Stokely, but in the end, John Lewis prevailed.
In the end, John Lewis prevailed. So who is Stokely and what motivated Bill Clinton in this moment to take pot shots against a civil rights activist? Well, Stokely is actually a super fascinating figure, and many people saw him as a bridge between MLK and Malcolm X. And so he actually saw MLK as a mentor. They were friends, and he wanted to empower sharecroppers. He was really about the workers. He cared about economic injustice. That was a big part of his identity, and he really did want to fight for the powerless. And so during the civil rights era, what he did was essentially eventually join the Black Power movement. He is usually cited when it comes to the phrase, coining the phrase Black Power. And in his later years, he actually moved to West Africa and decided that he wanted to fight for a socialist revolution in Pan-Africa. And so I bring you that because his identity, what he wanted to fight for, particularly economic justice, is something that certainly disagrees with the neoliberal policies and theory that someone like Bill Clinton not only believed in, but certainly implemented when he was president of the United States, right? So, and John Lewis did clash with him quite a bit. To give you one example, John Lewis in his book writes about running against Julian Bond in 1986. And apparently he got a call from Stokely Carmichael, and Stokely was trying to convince him to drop out of the race. And so yes, they certainly did clash, but it's important to remember that you have the Black Power movement, you have the Black Panthers, for instance, and then you have the civil rights movement. And there were lots of clashes between various leaders in the civil rights era. But at the same time, to take pot shots at someone like this during John Lewis's funeral, as a white guy, is not a good look, right? And I'm gonna get into more of the motivations behind why Bill Clinton felt the need to say this during John Lewis's funeral. But before I do that, I wanted to get some of your thoughts, Aida.
Well, I mean, it's the classic white man's divide and conquer. Only white people are allowed to have a fully realized spectrum when it comes to ideologies and beliefs. So you can be a white person in America and be a Republican and a Democrat, and it is not a reflection of you as a white person in America. It is just a part of who you are. But when you are a Black person and you are perceived to be revolutionary in America and a threat to white supremacy, you are perceived to be a bad guy. I love Malcolm
and capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love Stokely Carmichael, and I love anybody who spoke to me and told me that I didn't have to tolerate being dehumanized and mistreated, and that I am a fully realized human being and entitled to all of the freedoms that this country says I am entitled to as a human being. So when I see a white man from Arkansas who says he's a liberal and a Democrat speaking this at a Black man's funeral, the ultimate exercise of white privilege, to think that you can speak over a Black man's casket and demean another Black man is just, it is peak classic, white privilege, racist, this is racism. Like, we're not gonna call it anything else. How dare you? How dare you? I think that as people of color, we have to appreciate all of the people in our movement. The ones that are, Martin Luther King, who white people love to call on and call him weak. I would love for you to walk in Martin Luther King's shoes for just 2 weeks when he was the most hated man in America, and you tell me if he was a docile, that he was weak because he was strong. all the way across the aisle to Malcolm X, who said by any means necessary and stood by that window with his gun to protect his family, not to offend, but to defend. So when I hear people talk like this, and just the fact that you think that you can sit at a black man's funeral and criticize another man that used his ideology and his opinion of how to fight for our freedom, which was different from the one in the casket, but nonetheless fighting for the same thing, the humanity of black people in America, is just disrespectful and it's just downright repulsive. I'm so glad he's gone. Him and his saxophone kid keep it pushing.
So let me give you some of the thoughts of people on social media, people who I actually trust and had really great points to make. So for instance, Malika Jabali, who's an attorney and a columnist over at The Guardian, writes, "The gall of white liberals who feel entitled to dictate black politics is astounding. The struggle is not either or, and considering MLK himself worked with Stokely, which is absolutely true, and empathized with his approach, shows how utterly out of depth this man is." And what Malika mentions there is 100% true. Stokely, which by the way, I should note, after he had moved to West Africa, he also changed his name to Kwame Ture. So I'll refer to him to Ture at this point. He did absolutely see the nonviolent way of approaching civil rights as an important strategy. He did consider MLK his mentor and was absolutely devastated when MLK was assassinated. I'll give you another tweet. "The guy behind the 3 strikes bill thinks Stokely Carmichael went too far. You love to see it." And Wesley Lowry, who was a 60 Minutes correspondent, said, "I would love to read an essay rebutting / analyzing / contextualizing Clinton's comments about Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, at John Lewis's funeral. They were indeed rivals who often clashed. But in the end, John Lewis one seems remarkably reductive and likely ahistorical." So I want to turn to one of my favorite debates. It's available on YouTube. You should watch the full debate. This is from 1973, I believe. And you hear Kwame Ture make an argument about what needs to change, what needs to be done in order for true equality to exist. And I believe that this is the exact messaging that threatened people who believe the things that Bill Clinton believes, right? So just take a listen and you'll get what I'm talking about.
The only question would be, what kind of change do we want? I think everybody would be for that society. The question is whether or not it could come about under the present system of this government, or whether that system must be changed. I, for one, believe that it cannot come about under the present system, a capitalist system. That system must be changed. I believe that. Many of us would support capitalism because we actually believe that in a capitalist system, there's a chance for us to get the same amount of money as Rockefeller gets, because we're told that under capitalism there is equality of opportunity. So that we feel that if this year we didn't make as much as Rockefeller made, then we got to work a little bit harder, and next year we're gonna make it. But if we carefully examine a capitalist system, we will see that it's based on exploitation, because the viciousness of capitalism, and the reason why once black people examine it, we can never be for it, is that under a capitalist system, the fruits of those who labor are enjoyed by somebody else. That is, those who do the laboring, the fruits of their labor, they don't enjoy it. As a matter of fact, we could say under capitalism that the fruits of the labor of the toiling masses are enjoyed by those who do not labor. And again, as black people, we have clear examples of it. If we were to get the fruits of our labor from slavery, just from slavery, all we gotta do is go to Nixon and say, hey, look, you give us the fruits of our labor from slavery and we forget the score. We would be the richest people in the country, again, because under capitalism, the individual exploits the labor of the people.
So as I mentioned, this was the debate that took place in 1973. Angela Davis was also part of this debate. It's an incredible discussion. Please check out the full context of it. But I really do believe that it was that type of messaging that made people see Carmichael as such a threat, right? And I think that's what Clinton was really referring to when he made that statement during John Lewis's funeral.
And it's so disrespectful that he didn't even see fit to call the man by his name, right? That he said Carmichael and not Ture. That's dismissive and just continuously disrespectful. And listen, where is the lie? Where's the lie in what he said? Whether you are, I don't care what you stand for. Where is the lie? If Black people in America enjoyed the fruits of 400 plus years of labor in this country, and we're not even going to include the labor post-slavery with the non-living wages that they've gotten paid for doing all the kinds of work that they've been doing through Jim Crow, civil rights, up until today, where people of color are still not getting paid as much for doing the same jobs as white people in this country. If you gave people of color their money and their just due, they would be the richest people on the planet. So of course you want to keep this system in place, because that's the way you keep the people in place. Unfortunately, people have been brainwashed into believing that they too can be Jeff Bezos and make $1 trillion. And while Jeff Bezos continues to make the money throughout a pandemic where we can't work, while people who are poor can't even go to the bathroom while they're working. Ridiculous.
And I think it's really telling, who agreed with what Bill Clinton had to say, because while there was certainly some backlash on Twitter, for instance, there was a fascinating tweet by the editor-at-large over at Breitbart, Joe Pollack. He tweeted, Bill Clinton made an important point at John Lewis's funeral that the nonviolent approach of Lewis succeeded where Stokely Carmichael's militant style did not, and took the movement in the wrong direction. And so just how militant was Kwame Ture? Well, there have been historians who have studied him, of course. One of those individuals was interviewed on PBS, and I thought that this portion of the interview was telling. So let's take a look at that.
We like to put our leaders in boxes. So Malcolm X was here, Martin Luther King Jr. was here. And so where was Stokely Carmichael on that continuum?
I think Stokely is a bridge figure, and I think that Stokely fits in with Dr. King and Malcolm X as one of these key 20th century protean figures who bestrides the world stage, talking about human rights, but also pushing the envelope. So I'd say when we think about Martin and Malcolm, Carmichael is the bridge figure between civil rights and Black power, and he's the only major Black power icon who is also a civil rights activist. So he doesn't just come into activism in the mid-late 60s when things get hot. He actually knew Dr. King. He marched along.
They actually got along pretty well.
They were good friends. I mean, yeah. Stokely cries when King is assassinated. He considers him a friend, a mentor, older brother, even a father figure. But Stokely is also mentored by Black women like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. So he's this very interesting figure who's also this critic of the Vietnam War. He's a critic of economic injustice. So Black power only tells a part of the story.
And look, I gotta be honest, I think that these arguments about militantism, or how he was militant and how the message was wrong. No, the message here was about economic injustice, and that is precisely what conflicted with the ideology of people like Bill Clinton. Real quick, I'm just gonna remind everyone of what Bill Clinton did, what his legacy was about when he was president. In 1994, for instance, Clinton signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, the largest crime bill in history, which allocated $10 billion for prison construction, expanded the death penalty, and eliminated federal funding for inmate education. The act intensified police surveillance and racial profiling, and locked up millions of nonviolent offenders or offenses such as drug possession. It helped usher in the era of mass incarceration that devastated communities of color, for which Clinton himself had recently apologized for. The starkest example of the many racist and anti-poor measures directed at African Americans and passed during his administration was the 1996 Welfare Reform Bill, which transformed welfare from an exclusive and unequal cash assistance system that stigmatized its recipients into one that actually criminalized them. So he took a system that was already flawed and made it far worse. And one final point, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act ended traditional welfare by turning a federal entitlement, aid to families with dependent children, into block grants or temporary assistance to needy families, also known as TANF. That established tougher mandates on poor single mothers and gave states more flexibility in how they spent welfare dollars, opening the door for increased discrimination against minorities. He was all about gutting the social safety net. And of course that conflicts with what Ture was all about, what he wanted to fight for, which was economic justice.
You know what? So Donald Trump is president, is the 49th president? 50th? 45th. So I will say that there has not been one out of 45 presidents that has been good for Black people in America. And if that is the truth. So when we talk about these people, I'm gonna say this, militant and radical is always bad when it comes to Black people because they're fighting for their rights, they're fighting for equality in this country, and they're fighting for their just due. Anytime Breitbart says something in response to Bill Clinton of all people, it's because he's supporting one of their points because they uphold white supremacy daily. But what I wanted to say is, it is so, the dehumanization of the Black man in America, from being raped during slavery, being taken away from their families, being, beaten and just dehumanized to the current day, from slavery to Emmett Till to George Floyd, all the way through. It is always a threat to white racist America to see a Black man who stands on principles and decides that it is important to defend his people. And so when you see this attack on someone who is currently, his ideology may still be a threat, but he's not currently a threat to the day, and still trying to bury people and trying to just kick them throughout to make sure that the way that those people thought does not resurface in the current day because they want to uphold this white supremacy is just it's unbelievable to me. I think that, first of all, any Black man who looks like he will kick your ass is always a threat. Meanwhile, you got to think about the history of the people who are talking about this. The people who raped, pillaged, stole, abused, been violent, not just in America, throughout the world, as we talk about these systems of governments that have been infected with America's disease of violence and a lack of balance. Those are the people that are threatened by Black people that say we're human beings and we're worth fighting for too. Those are the people who are threatened by them. But it wasn't militant and radical for, the Columbus and the things that they did. That's not radical, that's not militant. It's only militant when the people who are the marginalized, if you heard of a band of gay people going around kicking straight people's asses, it would be appalling. They'd be like, oh my God, do you see these gay, anybody who's marginalized, who fights for it. When you're a Black woman or a brown woman, you're a woman, you're an angry Black woman, you got issues. I get it all the time when I have reason to be angry and enraged. So I just think it's interesting to hear, even while you are putting one in the ground, the final kick you want to deliver is still to Black people who decided to fight for the humanity and the reparations of Black people. How disgusting, how disgusting.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.